Hello, everyone. This is Yahweh. This will be volume 7 of the Secret Yahweh tapes. Wanted to start kind of where I left off at the end of number 6 with some information on what happened near the U.S. city or town, I guess you would say, of Roswell, New Mexico, in the late 40s. As the various military powers on Earth began testing nuclear power and nuclear weapons, nuclear reactions, basically. It drew the attention of the Greys to your planet. The Greys had been here before, found very little interest in you, and had basically left you alone until that fateful year when those experiments were done and those shockwaves literally were sent careening across the galaxy. The reason these are monitored and picked up around the galaxy is because nuclear energy, while being rather outdated by galactic standards, is a very dangerous thing to experiment with for any species. And the Greys had come to Earth to examine what was being done and to offer their services and guidance in exchange for free reign of the candy store. Not sure exactly what the Greys found of value on Earth, what they were negotiating for, but I do know that that was what happened. The crash near Roswell, they were visiting near Los Alamos. The Greys were looking at what was going on, and very unusual circumstances on all accounts surrounding that crash. Number one, from their side, redundancy is always of the utmost importance on any reconnaissance mission. You have to have at least 2 teams, 2 ways to get home, 2 ways to communicate, 2 sets of supplies. So for them to have crashed and the buddy system have broken down, why weren't they immediately picked up and taken back? Was a great concern to several of the, I guess what you would call galactic powers that be. The folks within our galaxy who try to keep a lid on things and run it in an orderly fashion, almost like a business. Level upon level, ladies and gentlemen. No matter where you are in the universe, I would assume, there's always someone above you. So they had crashed, and Greys were pretty concerned. I think the end result from their own internal investigation, the documentation that I have been made privy to, told a story that a rogue commander had sent this scout ship down with the intent of disabling the test that was going on at that time. It was something I don't think that was sanctioned by their command structure. So they were upset at what had happened, and the 7th Emperor found out about this. He was, by all accounts, livid. What happened in that respect was he was furious with the Greys for interfering in a planet that was kind of his pet project, and he was very furious with the Americans for taking them captive. The exchange was the offer of exchange. I was brought in to one of the general's office. I don't remember which. You'll have to forgive me. I met with several of them. Initially, a very, very large man who basically told me that the United States was in position to ask assistance from the Emperor. Someone that I guess this gentleman had found out about very recently prior to that, because he seemed very uneasy speaking about it. He seemed like he didn't really know on whose authority he was making this offer. But the offer was made that if the Emperor could interfere on America's behalf, with the Greys to eliminate the threat of any kind of retaliation by them on America, that the United States would give up its gold reserve to the Emperor of Nibiru. The United States gold reserve, when the United States went off the gold standard, there was a big debate around the world with the banking powers that be, centering around, how could this still be managed? Because they saw a very inherent value for them in doing something like that, a country that would not have to have its currency backed by gold reserves. The gold reserves of the United States had been moved to France almost close to a century ago, I would say, and were being held by a French within the world. People always think of Geneva, secret accounts of Swiss banks. There are secret banks all over the globe. The Templars started them. They've just flourished and become much more high tech. They can hold anything from money to actual physical objects within their vaults, and very well protected literally by private armies, some of them. And the United States had moved the gold to France before World War I, because that was actually what got the United States so involved in both of the world wars, was they had to protect their gold that had been put in France. And Hitler knew it was there. I think that's obvious by what your human history tells us. Prince, I'm going to move this. Is that okay? Okay, just like that. Yeah. Okay. And I'll pause for a drink. Cherry Kool-Aid. Oh my gosh, cherry. Oh, it's so delicious. Cherry flavoring. Why is it that cherry flavoring tastes nothing like actual cherries? It's very odd to me. I would have thought that your kind would have come up with a trademark name for that flavor, as opposed to just calling it cherry. Well, so these gold reserves, being in France, France acted as basically an escrow agent in the transaction, and the emperor interceded, and the Greys went about their business. But it did increase the Greys' activity on Earth. There was nothing the emperor could do about that. He couldn't tell them, you can't go there. This would be akin to someone saying, you can't go out onto the ocean. That island out there that nobody cares about, you can't go out there because I said so. It would be considered too challenging a statement. And regardless, I don't think that the emperor had any concern for the Greys, and I honestly don't think he has any now, which sometimes causes a bit of contention between the two of us. But the United States gave up its gold to the Emperor of Nibiru in exchange for protection from the Greys, for retaliation from Roswell. There's a lot more gold on the planet. A lot of it right now is being held by the Chinese and the Russians. The Russian oligarch structure, the oligarchy structure was what I was going for there. In Russia, a few select families that have made a lot of money under communism, or lived well. I guess money was irrelevant then, but lived very well under communism. And then as the former Soviet Union broke up, were each given chunks, respectively, to turn into capitalistic ventures with which they could make a lot of money again. Use that to buy up a lot of gold. The Chinese government, who has given loans to everybody and their dog, has been repaid as kind of a down payment by a lot of organizational borrowers, especially with gold. And it's because the United States has had the currency that everybody else wants to use to move money around the globe with. The dollar has always been a good bet. that the United States has been able to function without having anything backing its currency for nearly a century. If this information gets out, that the United States no longer has a gold reserve at Fort Knox, then it's going to cause catastrophic problems for the United States. The United States people themselves, because they theoretically own their government, are very much in debt to the Chinese. Your homes that many of you have gotten the mortgage on, you don't own the home in which you live. Somebody else does. Now, what you've got going in your favor is that some kind of systematic mass foreclosure is basically impossible. Your court system couldn't process that much business. It's not designed to be efficient. It's designed to be thorough. And that may be your saving grace, is the cumbersome legal system that so many of you complain about. I remember right after September 11th, it was your Senator John McCain who said on television that he hoped that the perpetrators of the 9/11 disaster were brought to justice, but he hoped that that happened without changing any of the laws of the United States of America. And his comments centered around his idea that we have the best justice system in the world. Well, because I'm sitting here in America, had the best justice system in the world, and this was our chance to show that. And with what's come to light since then, everything else aside, only focusing on Guantanamo Bay, that prison off your shores where people, regardless of what they have done, you can execute them if you really believe that they deserve death, and be much more humane than keeping them alive in a tortured state for days, months, weeks, years on end. It's very against, I believe, what the gentleman who founded your country had in mind. When the United States of America was being put together, a great contingency of what you would call the Illuminati were sent from the continent, from Europe, to America. They dealt a lot with the Freemasons at the time. Not anymore, but at the time they worked a lot with the Freemasons. And many of your founding fathers had great trepidations about their involvement because they were in very close with some of the prominent members who took part in the birth of the United States of America. And consequently, because of this, that spawned the creative process that created your Bill of Rights, your Declaration of Independence here in America. Very interesting to me, the debates that took place, of which I only ever witnessed one during those times. So I'll tell you what I know, and then I'll tell you what I know firsthand. What I know is that the Illuminati is real. It has had an actual leader, which has been handed off in perpetuity for hundreds of years. They are a relatively benign organization. They don't wish anybody any harm. What they look for is cutting-edge fringe science that's going on that may be unpopular with the general public. And let me give you a couple of examples. Number one that comes to mind because of Locare's work is antimatter and matter, causing huge explosions. People are worried about it creating a black hole. You would need a big chunk of antimatter to a large quantity of, I guess chunk is not an actual definition, a large quantity to create anything that would cause you any harm. Black holes are started on a very minute basis all the time. throughout the galaxy. Even on your planet, there are some processes that can occur that can create a quick condensation of mass that kind of feeds off itself, and the energy builds for what it would be in relation to its size, in relation to its mass, an equivalent time, let's say. I was going to say a reasonable time, but that didn't make any sense as a definition. What was that? What is that? Oh, they're moving some amplifiers down the hall, I guess. Does everything that you have that symbol on it? Oh. Yeah, it's different now. I think it's pretty cool. I'll have to show you my symbol. Yes, I have a symbol. My symbol that I use for Yahweh is an ancient symbol that has been around on your planet throughout the five, from the days of the first sun through now, the end of the last days of the fifth sun. It's a sign that I was one of the first things I saw when I started researching Earth. When I was reading some old tablets, I saw that, and I asked one of my professors, "What does this mean?" And they said nobody knows. And one of the people in my class said Yahweh knows, as kind of a joke, because I thought I was kind of a know-it-all. And in my mind, I thought, that symbol must mean Yahweh knows. One of these days I'll have to tell you actually what it means. I don't want that particular piece of information to be made public just yet. And the reason is let me explain. There are members of the powers that be on the planet Earth, in particular those who have controlled a lot of the undermarkets, the black markets over the ages. Sins, vice businesses, prostitution, drugs, alcohol, gambling, things like that. A lot of people think of them as the mafia. That will see that symbol, and it will cause them great discomfort, great unease, because they've all been taught at their highest levels. Just like when you get to the higher levels of Freemasonry, you're taught what certain symbols mean that you see every day. And this is one that means, well, I don't want to say exactly what it means. Let's just say that it means that you have been found out, or I'm on to you. Something like that, I guess, would be without giving away the actual words, a good translation. I'm going to pause for a minute. So when the United States... Yes. I'm sorry, guys. I keep knocking into this microphone stand. When the United States came to me, and I started meeting with these higher-ranking officials and eventually the president, it was very unusual circumstances. Their back was against the wall. The Greys had apparently shown them somehow an example of their firepower, and it had the Americans scared to death. They were very much nervous about the Soviet Union attacking them with nuclear weapons, and they were very afraid that at the time that any altercation with anyone, if we would have had a skirmish on the border with Canada, the Soviets may have used that as an opportunity to attack while we were down. And the Greys' demonstration of their military prowess must have been something that involved killing people or doing something which would look like the government did it. Because, and I don't know what that might have been. I would assume, knowing the Greys, it would have been some kind of a chemical or biological agent unleashed on the American public that looked like somehow it was a government screw-up. And the Greys are very good at causing, getting people on this planet to kind of buy into what they want to do, because they abduct a lot of you in your sleep. and you're very susceptible to their suggestions. They take you into an altered state. Most of you are given a certain type of what you would call like a tranquilizer, a sedative. Some of you don't remember very much. Some of you remember quite a bit. But the Greys can take people and basically subliminally give them suggestions. And by doing that, if they, let's take for instance, if something happens and they take a bunch of reporters or news editors, people who are in control of the 5 major news outlets, and implant the idea in their mind, and then there is evidence that comes up through the wires that verifies what those thoughts were. They just think they had a hunch and followed it. And I believe that they had somehow blackmailed the U.S. government, because the U.S. government was very quick to make this offer, and they knew somehow that the Seventh Emperor was going to accept. And I've always found that a little bit odd, because I didn't think that he would at first. I kind of thought, gee, he's not going to want to get involved in this. But he was very, very mad with the menacing Greys. They're a menace to the entire galaxy. And those of you Greys out there who can hear this, you need to take a step back and clean up your own yard before you mess up somebody else's. The people of Earth won't need you once this is all over. They won't choose to have much to do with your species. I'm speaking to the Greys now, if they're listening. And some of them may order this, if Vince is going to sell them online, or their associates will, and it will be passed along to them. And I'll hear about it, I'm sure. So the exchange was made, and the Emperor interceded, and the Greys have been coming back ever since with more frequency. I get asked a lot about crop circles everywhere I go, because crop circles are one of those things that has been happening for a long time, but it's only because so many people now have the ability to see things from the sky. I mean, 100 years ago, it was very rare that much was seen from the air in farming communities. And then the airplane and crop dusting came about, and that's when these phenomena first really started being reported. Was this stuff that just looked like a herd of something had come through and knocked down part of your crop, seen from above when it was an actual pattern. And the Greys jumped on this and have made several crop circles. They've fed the frenzy. They have been a part of showing humans how to make them very effectively. It's very difficult to tell a lot of times which ones are man-made and which ones are of unknown origin. I, of course, can tell. And I've been brought in to look at a few of them. And I've only ever seen 2 that actually ever caused me any pause or concern. The first one was in England. It was made with the coordinates in binary code of a nuclear missile silo that was a couple of kilometers away. That was concerning, because that was showing anyone who was taking satellite imagery, who saw that it was some kind of a binary message and decoded it, the exact coordinates of a missile silo in the UK that was supposedly top secret. The second one that I saw, I don't know if this one's ever been, the photographs have ever been released, publicly at least. It was in Mozambique, and very unusual. It was made in a bunch of prickly bushes. It wasn't like corn or something people were growing for food. It was just done out in the bush, and it was huge. It was about maybe a half a mile in diameter. a circular pattern, and it showed the precise alignment of the galaxy on December 21st, 2012. And the place on this depiction where Earth would be, there was no Earth. And that was kind of weird to me, because that was something that, if that was man-made, that would have taken a team of people a month to create. It's important to note this, I believe, and include it in my story, because the Greys have played such an important part in pop culture on your planet over the last 50, 60 years. They've done this very intentionally, I might add, because they very much would like to be included in the process of your assimilation. I think they think that there's something that they can find of value in the equation, in the transaction. Wish I knew what it was. That's what keeps me up at night, is what are they up to? What's their part in this? What are their intentions? You'll have to forgive me for some pauses back there. The technicians came in to lay down some cables or something, and Prince had to scurry him out of here. There's a lot going on at Paisley Park today. I'm going to kind of switch gears for a minute to clear my mind and think and talk about something else. And tell you a little bit about the time that I spent during what you would call the Dark Ages in Europe. Don't know why this is coming to mind right now at this moment, but I was in Europe during what's been called in history the Inquisition. The human mind can be something that can be easily corrupted, and it plays tricks on people. And there is a human emotion that I've never really understood. I've felt, as I've discussed, the need for revenge, the thirst for revenge, a few times in my existence. But I've never really understood the human emotion. It seems like an emotion or an instinctual response to want to assign blame when something bad happens. Something bad happens, it's not just random happenstance. It's some reason to assign blame, or some party to hold accountable for whatever happened. And during the what you would call the Dark Ages, a lot of bad things happened. The climate of the earth at that time, especially of the continent Europe at that time, was going through a lot of changes. There was a lot of very weird weather. And that, coupled with kind of a religious zeal that was starting to apex. People who had their families for generations had been poor and not able to do much else, were suddenly able to, if they could speak well, make a good living as what you would call nowadays a preacher, minister. In those days it was, you didn't carry identification. If you showed up in a town and looked the part and acted the part, most people believed that's who you were. It certainly worked for me for hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands. And there was also a kind of an ingrained misogynistic backdrop to the vibe at the time in Europe. I think that, for a lot of people up until that time, I never really heard a lot of women talk about giving birth as being a painful experience. The pain and agony of childbirth was something I didn't hear about until those times, and that started to be talked about. And I think it's because the climate was in such influx. People weren't able to eat as much. People were less healthy. They were more prone to diseases and viruses. And women who were pregnant and going through childbirth, who were not fully healthy, were having difficult times and dying. And From what I saw, because so many women were dying during childbirth, these just guilt or grief-stricken men, their husbands, the fathers of these babies who sometimes lived, sometimes didn't, were just absolutely devastated. They honestly believed somehow God was punishing them. And a lot of them were very resentful, in my experience, to the children that survived for some reason. Almost like they blamed them for for their mother's death. And this happened enough to have caused me to notice it from kind of an anthropological context, that, this could be some kind of a shift. There's a lot of people looking to blame something. And some of these ministers or preachers, these folks that traveled around and kind of would gather people together and give a good sermon and then ask for donations, or, for hospitality, can you put us up for the night? We're people of the faith. Began coming up with something to blame. And what they blamed was women, a lot of times. They began saying that these women had died during childbirth because they were somehow not living in favor with God. And a lot of them said this. I don't know how well this is documented in your histories, but it's what I saw firsthand. These women, a lot of them were held up as witches, as practicing dark arts. There's a faith in Wiccan, I've heard of, that is like good witchcraft, or it's now the commonly accepted, people practicing witchcraft in a popular manner, in something that's acceptable to the rest of society. And it's not much different in a lot of respects to some of the ancient religions that were practiced on this planet. I know that Namo, when he was spending time in Timbuktu, because it was such a center of learning and of trade at the time, has told me stories. As a cultural anthropologist, he would seek these things out when he would hear about them and investigate them, and later when we would talk, he would kind of relay what he had found out to me. In Africa at the time, there were literal witch doctors, is what nowadays they would be called, who worked as both healers, and they could also harm people with their spells and their potions that they would make. And he was fascinated at how they had received this information. And he began tracing these stories back and asking, well, who did you hear it from? And who did you hear it from? And as someone who could travel and do so over a long period of time, he was able to trace a lot of these stories back, sometimes to their village of origin. And without exception, he said, without exception, he believed that all of these witch doctors that practiced this form of witchcraft had all learned it from the same village in Mali at about the time of the birth of Jesus. It was concerning to him because he thought it might be the Yeshua Denal, the Antichrist, being born at the same time, or being on earth at the same time as Yeshua. And that wasn't the case, at least not that he was ever to discover. But this village still exists today, and in this village they still practice this form of black magic in Mali. And I have mentioned before, one of the first things I saw about this planet, a picture that was different pictures of the different topography of Earth, was in Mauritania, the Great Eye of Africa. And seen from space, it looks like kind of like an impact crater, a large impact crater. And it's always been interesting to me because I'm always so drawn to Africa. I almost wish I would have been assigned one slot up, excuse me, up one's. I can't talk. Yeah, I don't know, guys. I got tongue tied. No, not very often, but I do sometimes wish that I would have been sent one slot up and gone as number 8 to Africa, because not only as an anthropologist, but just because I am so drawn to that continent. Africa is some of the most ancient ground on Earth. There's a lot of it in northern Canada. There's a lot of it in Australia. And there's a lot of it in Africa, in particular the southern parts of Africa. And societies have dwelt there for hundreds of thousands of years. They've seen through all 5 of the Earth's stages. The peoples on Africa have survived. I don't know of any other continent that's taken place. It could have on another continent, but I don't know. The only one I know for sure is Africa, and I know that because I have been into the caves underneath the Sahara Desert and seen the remnants of some of these civilizations. Some of them are still active today. There are still people living subterranean in what is now covered by the sands of the Sahara Desert. A very, very large population of people. And further down south, there's another subterranean society that's, I think, even larger. Farther south. Oh, sorry. I'm pointing at Prince's map right now. I guess the people listening can't see where I'm pointing. Yes, right near Tanzania, there is another subterranean entrance. There's a lot of caves on planet Earth. Earth has always been a very active planet, from everything I've ever known about it, constantly shifting and changing. It's one of the things that I think attracted the Anunnaki here in the old days, because it's constantly changing. New deposits of gold are being revealed. Now, I get asked this quite a bit. The Anunnaki look for gold. Why do they need humans to do it? Why can't they just come here and dig it all up and take it? The Anunnaki have a very difficult time surviving in the atmosphere of the Earth. The Earth, while gold is basically readily available here by galactic standards, it is not present in an equal amount in the atmosphere like it is on Nibiru. On Nibiru, the water, the air, the ground, it's full of gold, microscopic gold dust. Gold is very malleable. You know, you can take a small piece of gold and smash it out the size of a football pitch. And gold is broken up in minute, almost on a molecular level, by the Nibirians and spread out across their atmosphere, and it allows them to live and thrive. They've done this for millions of years. There was, by your time, it would have been probably a couple of 100,000 years ago. It was before I came to be, before I was quote-unquote born, that an asteroid in another system, not in this quadrant of the galaxy, but an asteroid had been found that was basically pure gold. This would have been something that would have been the size of what's something equivalent, like a large ship, like a boat. What are they called? The ones that people go on and they pay? Cruise ship? A large cruise ship. That's how big this asteroid of gold was, that was found and sold to Nibiru by a race of beings from a different quadrant of the galaxy. The gold reserves on Nibiru probably are just a wild guess, in the billions of tons. Nibiru is a very heavy planet. It's a very dense mass, and there are many places on Nibiru that are specially fortified to retain their gold reserves. The Nibiru could go without gold for a long time on what they've got stored up. So why do they want it from Earth? Why does this have any interest to them? Well, it's because every approximately 3,600 years, the orbit of their planet comes in close proximity to your solar system, and they have been, when it's convenient to them, stopping in and picking up these shipments. They can come here. They can come to your planet. They can walk around. They wouldn't look reptilian to you. I get very annoyed when I hear that. To think that there's some species out there that looks like Bosk on The Empire Strikes Back is just preposterous, really. And the reason is this: the reason your species, the humans, have evolved like you have, is because it's a very likely or logical, evolution for a bipedal species. And a lot of species, because of the way planets that lend themselves to being hospitable to life seem to have evolved beings, many have become bipedal to walk and get around and move around more freely, I guess would be the term. Humans like to talk about their opposable thumbs. There are a lot of species in the galaxy that have quote-unquote opposable thumbs. But one thing about humans that's very different is that humans' brains, their thinking center, is in their head. And for a lot of species, that is in their core, like where your heart or your lungs would be for a human. And most species' lungs equivalent are in their head. And where their nasal cavity is, where the air is brought in, their lungs are there. The brains of most species that have evolved, or what we would consider the equivalent of a brain in a human, are always in an area of their body that's very well protected. And this is through evolution, because natural selection, you can't function without a brain. There's a lot of work that's been done on a galactic level to understand what makes brains work. Because every species has some sort of equivalent organ, you would say, you would call it an organ, that functions as a brain or a thinking center. And because when someone passes on, that thinking center does shut off in all species. So what powers it? What causes a mass of flesh to become alive and think for itself and be sentient? What is that power? What is that element or that mass? Because if you, I was part of an experiment. Was brought in to analyze some results from a mass spectrometer on an experiment that was done with people who were passing away in the Soviet Union. They would bring prisoners or old people or military people who were passing away in these hospitals. When they were very close to death, they would put them on a table that was basically a very large scale, and it would weigh down to the just tiny amount. I don't know how many decimals. There were a lot. And when someone would expire, when they would die, that weight would change slightly. They would weigh less. Now I'm talking about a tiny millionth of a pound or of a kilogram, but they would weigh less at the moment of death. Their weight would shift. Those types of experiments have been done where I went to university on Nibiru. They were done all the time. This was, the weighing of the body was something that they'd already done years ago. But the measuring of what came out, or what was given off by the body at the moment of death, was very much the topic of study. And what they had found out over the years was that they were able to track these small particles of energy, like little photons, that left a living organism at its moment of death. And they all went the same direction. They all went towards a certain point out there in the universe. And no matter where you were measuring this throughout the galaxy, those would leave the observed body in the direction of this area of the universe. I don't know what they found when they went to this area of the universe. They were going at the time that we all got trained and left to come here. At the time I came here, they were leaving to go check it out. They had sent a party, and it's very easy to get around. Well, when I say very easy, it's not. It's relatively easy to get around in our quadrant of the galaxy. Even to go across the galaxy, going around the black hole in the center, can be done in a relatively short period of time with the technology that exists and is readily available. But to leave our galaxy and go to another galaxy is a journey. It's been done countless times. Some have come back, some haven't. Those tales are probably best left told by someone else. It's never been anything that I really want to get into. It would be the equivalent of an anthropologist on your planet. Excuse me, I'm having a very hard time with my throat today. It would be the equivalent of an anthropologist on your planet, Earth, feeling like he or she wanted to study other beings around the galaxy at this time in your culture. It would just be, why? There's not enough information available. How do I get there? It's too much work. I want to study people that, beings that I can find out a little bit about going in, and actually that their cultures are something that they will allow me to observe firsthand, and that I won't have to observe from afar or, be ancient in age by the time I get there. And I'm very curious to see what they found when they got there. I would assume what they find is going to be a big part of the answer that you Earthlings are always looking for, as far as what is heaven? Where do we go when we die? If you're looking for an actual location, that may be it. I don't know how I got sidetracked on that. Vince and Prince are motioning for me to get back on topic, and I don't want to. That's too fascinating to me. Awa, when he went up north, told me before we were leaving, when we were still in training and we were about ready to all go to our separate areas in the palace and await our departure. Awa told me that one of the things that he had learned by surviving in extreme conditions was that within his soul, he was able to find comfort in the infinite nature thereof. By understanding that his soul was something that had no beginning and no end, he was able to find great comfort in the solitude that sometimes would go on for long times on his assignments. And he also had this unique understanding of where he'd been and where he was quote-unquote going with his life. And I've always wondered, because whoever he came in contact with must have benefited a lot from that type of just whatever the opposite of narcissistic is. That's what Awa probably would have been best described as. Someone who was so, especially by earthly standards, so good looking, so handsome, such a powerful figure, such a gorgeous specimen of human being, that had absolutely no concept of his own beauty. And he only wanted to find out more about what was inside him, about his own spirit, his own soul. He wasn't someone who, I don't think I ever saw him look at himself in a mirror or fix his hair or dress himself up in any manner. I wonder whoever received him must have never wanted to let him go. And I hope that before my time here is done, that somehow I could see Awa again. Awa, if we could figure out a way, especially if Yeshi gets back, if Yeshi comes and we could figure out a way to find Awa, if we could go to Afghanistan, I've been thinking about this all day, we could change. They would have to volunteer. We would not do this forcibly, but we could change the mindset of some of the people that control this planet. Let me explain what would have to happen. They would have to come to us with the knowledge that we would be able to reset their paradigm. We would have to show them this is what you will be reset to. They would have to agree to this. And all 9 of us would have to be present to work this device, to make this happen. But if they chose this route, and the reason I've been thinking about this is because of my negotiations, because of what I'm taking on here. If I could convince some very powerful people on your planet to participate willingly, they would not be going against their better judgment. They would be doing what they knew to be right. After the procedure was done, of course. Now, to do this, I would have to convince them 3 things. Number 1, that their way of going about this is wrong. Number 2, that they are incapable of literal change, of absolute change. They're incapable of this. That their very makeup, both genetically and through the summation of all of their experience, because life is just experience and expectation. You have expectations based on what you've experienced, and you make every decision based on. You have new experiences based on what your expectations are. And so I would have to convince them that it's not your fault that you're thinking in the wrong, that you're going about this the wrong way, and I can change this. And the third thing would have to be that they would be willing to give up part of their memories in order to have this accomplished. And the reason that this would be a very good way to go about this is because these are people who are already sanctioned to have a part in this decision, to have a part in your assimilation with the galactic community. These people are already in line to be representatives of the people of planet Earth. It would make my job much easier. Now, to do this, I would somehow probably have to get the permission of, I would assume, someone very high up in the U.S. government. And I would also have to get the permission of the Taliban. And that would be no easy task, but I'm thinking in my mind right now of people that I know, humans that could arrange this for me. So don't be surprised if you see Barack Obama or some other high-ranking U.S. official, Secretary Clinton, or maybe even they get the vice president to do it. That wouldn't be very exciting, though. Come to Afghanistan for some kind of a surprise visit. Sometime end of December, or end of November, excuse me, first part of December 2010. Yeah, I know I got sidetracked on that, guys. I know. And I've got 2 more volumes left to do, and you guys have been awesome to participate in this with me. But these little side stories are very important to me because these little things that have happened to me during my time on this planet, it's not been the big events that I've been a part of that have changed my perception of humanity. It's been the small things. It's been the person who I had looked at on the street as an arrogant, rich person. What's the word? Aristocrat. Suddenly changed my perspective of he or she by giving money or food or some comfort to maybe a child who was going without on the streets. I've seen this countless times. Unfortunately, I've also seen countless times people take horrible advantage of people who are in bad situations. But I do honestly believe that my good experiences do outweigh the negative ones that I've seen here on planet Earth. And that's why I'm fighting so hard for the human race. And that's also why I get these ideas about somehow changing the course of what's going to happen with your respective world leaders and world powers, not through force or coercion, but by arguing simple logic to these men and women. Queen Beatrix, of the Netherlands, is someone that I know very well. She has great influence over people around the globe. And she can be a woman who makes her decisions from her heart or from her head, as you would say. And what I have always known her to be is someone who has a deep love for her people, and indeed all the people of Europe. She's very, very much a European matriarch. And she could see the logic in some of the ideas that I've got bouncing around my head. Doing these tapes has been very therapeutic for me. I don't know if anybody's going to want to listen to me talk for, we figured it out this morning, it's going to be 10 to 11 hours of my voice just talking. And I don't know if anybody will want to listen to it. I know a lot of people do on YouTube, but I don't know if anybody's going to want to actually listen to a CD of my voice for this much time. But I can tell you that my voice has been listened to by people of great power and great influence on your planet over the years, with great success. And because I consider myself to be someone who does see all sides and does seek balance in all things, my agenda is pure. I don't represent anyone, even His Highness Emperor 7. I don't represent his agenda. I buy into the ideology that the Earth would be a great place to visit, and at first I bought into it, that it'd be great to come here and study and be a part of a culture that was developing, and because of my certain skill set that I'd always hoped to be able to be some kind of a force for good, that I could actually change the course of your history and help another species of humanoid. That's something that would gain me, great accolade with my people on Ibanya. And so I wanted to go, and it's been very good for me to talk about this, because there have been times since I've been here where I've really wondered, what the hell am I doing here? What have I gotten myself into? I know there's been times, especially lately for Vince, because we used to release all this information through newsletters, and Vince was not my source to disseminate it. And when Vince came up with the idea to do the YouTube videos as a way to promote his music, I thought, well, let's try it out and see what happens. But I had no idea the attention it would garner him, both positive and negative. And now that I'm here doing this, now that I'm saying these words and going through all of this in my mind as I begin this last stage of my journey, it's allowed me great reflection on my time here. And I'm very glad that I made the choice to come to Earth and be a part of your civilization for these last 3,500 years. And I'm very glad that you've made the choice to listen to what I have to say here. If these recordings survive for the ages, and I somehow am able to hear my voice again years from now, if someone has saved this recording, I'm going to tell myself a message now. What I just told myself was, right now, at this moment, it's my birthday. And I basically told myself, happy birthday. And that will tell me what day it was that I recorded this. And it will undoubtedly bring back fond memories of my time here in Chanhassen at Paisley Park Studio D. Which, by the way, is right near a very busy freeway. I would have thought that knowing Prince, that this place would have been secluded and tucked away somewhere off the beaten path. But boy, this is like right off the on-ramp, and you're here. Or off the off-ramp, I guess would be the term. I don't like riding in cars. I never have. I don't think I ever will get used to riding in cars. It's a very unsafe feeling for me. Because cars don't do anything to displace the gravity, you are traveling at 60, 70 miles an hour. And when you hit something, that thing doesn't hit you, you hit it. Your car stops, your body is still traveling 60, 70 miles an hour. Very relieved that seatbelts have become so commonplace in your vehicles, automobiles. For a long time, in automobiles, you would get in one and there would be nothing to strap yourself in with. And for a long time, I would not ride in automobiles. It took me a long time to be able to ride. I traveled mainly by ship for a long time. And I've never been afraid of the ocean. I swim literally like a fish, and that doesn't bother me. But the steamships would make so much noise. They would disrupt the ocean around them so much that when they came to be, very difficult for me to travel on one. Trains were all but, I couldn't abide trains. Still can't. In the old days, you'd be riding on a train, and because they ran on coal, sometimes the wind or something would take these flecks of burning hot coal, relatively small, but they would find their way in and hit you. It was a horrible way to travel. And I've been on airplanes several times. I had to be convinced by one of my colleagues that I could not be harmed on one in order for me to get on one. But that is now my preferred method of transportation. Very difficult for me to get into an automobile, though. And consequently, I have developed over the years a great love of horses and all things equestrian. Horses have been working with the human race. They're not a sentient being. Horses, dogs, cats. You've got that right. They are animals. They don't deserve to be treated poorly, and certainly never deserve to be abused. But they do have feelings just like you and me. Their spirit comes from the same source that yours and mine does. They feel pain, they feel discomfort, they feel happiness and joy. And what I've always enjoyed about horses is, especially in the days before now, in my travels, was that horses would know their routes so well that you really didn't have to, what you would call, steer or guide them. You would just sit atop a horse and be one with your surroundings and have your travels that way. And by traveling horseback, I've seen areas of the globe that no one else sees now. Well, people have seen, but not now. They're not common areas of travel, because the old routes that made themselves accessible via horse were not used a lot of times when they switched over to the routes that are accessible by automobiles. And so when I travel in developed countries in automobiles, I will see areas of the countryside that look familiar, that I remember from years before. And it's difficult because there are not a lot of horses in the West where Vince lives. There's a lot of horses in areas where people ride horses, and you can go and with some money go wherever you want to some extent. And I do that all the time. I've taken Vince a couple of times. He's not as much of an outdoorsman as I am. He likes to think of himself as one, but he's not. How much time, guys? They're motioning 10 minutes. Okay, let me have my drink. Oh, I am always going to make cherry Kool-Aid from now on. That may have overtaken grape as my favorite flavor. But even in the older days, trains would go through the center of towns, and when you would travel from area to area, the train would go through the center of the population, and you could experience and see a lot more. And now with roads, your highways and your major avenues of travel so often go around your living communities, that it's very unusual. It's a very unusual method of travel for me as someone who's traveled your planet for over 3,500 years. To be in an automobile racing down an expressway at 60 or 70 miles per hour and not really be able to see much off to the side. I don't know if people realize how much they're missing out on with that mode of transportation, with automobiles. I wonder a lot out west, like I say, where Vince lives, a lot of people own automobiles and they travel extensively. They drive a lot. They drive an hour to work and then they drive an hour back. And perhaps that's something that I will never understand about your race. Perhaps that's something that is uniquely human. This need to be preoccupied, to spend your time in motion or in traverse from one place to another. So many humans work at their respective, what they do to earn money. Yes, job. And they go to work at their job and save their money to go on a vacation. And they spend better part of a day, sometimes more than that, in travel. And then they arrive at their destination, and then they go and visit this place and go visit this place, and they're in motion all the time. And it's a very human aspect, because the concept of vacationing is something that is done throughout the galaxy. But humans are the only species I've ever known that actually like to be in transit while relaxing. Most species, I would say, the majority of species that have an equivalent of what you would consider a vacation, do so by becoming very still and meditating for a long period of time. Much like I talked about on one of the previous volumes, how to relax yourself and journey inside. They take vacations inside themselves and explore their own souls, their own spirits. Many people have been able to access the Akashic Record by doing this. When Edgar Cayce started with his readings, he would put himself into a deep trance. And when I heard about what this gentleman was doing, I came to see him and see what was he doing. And I thought that, because I was able to pay and he would do this reading for me and I was able to ask these questions, I thought I would ask some questions to which I knew the answer and see how accurate his information was. And what I found out was that this gentleman was indeed able to access what I understood to be the Akashic Record. And that always to me seemed like, why don't humans do this for their vacation? Why don't when they have time to do whatever they want and relax and recharge themselves, to push that mental reset button that they all have, that every species have. Why do they choose to go to a busy airport and wait in line to get on a plane and then be crammed in there in a small seat, flying over an ocean or what have you, for several hours to arrive at a destination, to go in a stranger's automobile, some of whom drive like madmen? Taxi drivers in the third world that could be a very good ride at an amusement park in the States. Third world taxi ride. You really get, you take your life in your own hands, a lot of the areas around the globe that you will venture, and ride in what's considered public transportation, the taxi system, people who will take you someplace for money. So I've never understood that, and I think that it will be very interesting as the Earth is brought into the galactic community and humans are given the opportunity to travel. Will humans be the species that really is the pioneers to go outside of our galaxy? Could the human race go from a species that doesn't know anything about interstellar travel to, within a century of assimilation, being the ones who are heading out into the far reaches of space to find out what's out there? Because humans do seem to enjoy the journey. They like the drive, or the flying there. The people that I've known who are professional pilots tell me a lot of times that they just love the feeling that they are traveling this much distance in this time, because by their standards they're really moving, and they like the feeling of being on the move, not staying in one place at one time. And I always wonder if that may be the ultimate the ultimate end of the human. I don't want to say end as in it ends. I mean the leaving of Earth. Will people eventually, by one or group by group, head out from Earth to other areas of the galaxy, or indeed try their hand at other areas of the universe? Because on your planet, throughout history that I've observed, people have never been content where they are. There's that old phrase, the grass is always greener on the other side, that I hear in the U.S. at least a lot. And I think that's part of human nature. And the ones of you who I have been associated with, who have found peace in their time here on this planet, none of them have shared that trait. They've always been the kind of individuals who don't leave. They don't travel around. They don't leave very far away from where they live or their comfort of their surroundings, what they're used to. Some will remain in the same place for months or even years on end, hardly moving, in a meditative state. This may not make sense why I'm saying all this, so let me try to clarify, because I'm being told I have 2 minutes left. I say this because it's possible that the human race, after all is said and done, could decide to go in two different directions. You could be left with a society of people on the earth who there is so much information available to them. They're able to basically plug in and experience a virtual reality, and through technology never have to get up. Never have to get up to eat or go to the bathroom. Their brains are plugged in to this virtual existence where they can explore anything without moving, including the ones you are. Exploring yourself, exploring your own soul. And there are the other type of people who are restless, who are never able to sit still. And I wonder if they will find Earth too small at that point, once the rest of the galaxy and the universe is opened up to them as a frontier, will the Earth become a population of people who are basically in a meditative state, and everyone else has left the planet in pursuit of adventure, in pursuit of new planets? And this has been something that has been part of the theory of my field of interstellar anthropology for as long as the field's been around, because we see very unique similarities in certain cultures around the galaxy without having actual historical record of how they got there. We don't know if they evolved on their respective planet, or if they were evolved somewhere else and branched out and occupied or populated different planets of the same species. Well, that's it for Volume 7. I'm going to try to think very, very hard before I do Volumes 8 and 9, because I want to make sure that I'm able to include everything that I want said. But thank you for listening to me. If you've listened to me so far, you're well past the equivalent of an 8-hour job.